Hello everybody and welcome to this video where we're going to be talking about the risk of being hacked or compromised as a means to get to your supply chain at large. So what does this mean? Well, there's an increasing risk that smaller SMEs are being seen as a way to get access to the larger supply chain companies. So if your business does work for one of the big supply chains in the UK, then the SMEs are actually the weaker link in the chain because often these big companies have enterprise grade security in place. And then they have SME clients who feed into that system who, let's say, have maybe a slightly more relaxed approach to their cybersecurity and could be a much easier target for cybersecurity hacking and all these different things that come with that. So before we get into the details of that, my name is Simon Batchelor. I'm a marketing strategy consultant from Pallant Studio, and we work with engineering, manufacturing and IT companies to help them generate more leads, to help them open up their pipeline and connect with people outside of their network. I'm joined today by Paul. So Paul, do you want to give us a quick intro?
Hi, yeah, Paul Everington from Everwell Associates. We work in the same sort of areas that you do, Simon, advising them on their business strategies, systems, improving efficiency, but particularly looking at cyber and risk assessments and business resilience. What happens when things go wrong? What planning have you got in place?
So me and Paul have been talking recently about two very high profile cases here in the UK, one of which is JLR or Jaguar Land Rover and the other of which is Co-op. There's also a third one, which is M&S, which is another food brand. And what these all have in common is that they have been supply chain hacks. So that is to say that JLR wasn't necessarily hacked because someone managed to get into JLR directly. What they did manage to do was use an SME whose cybersecurity wasn't up to the standard of JLR to get in and then gain access into the Jaguar Land Rover system that way. So this means that hackers are being very clever because what they're doing is they're looking at these big companies and then trying to work out, well, actually these companies, so for example, Jaguar Land Rover has 2,500 suppliers just in the UK. So that means there's potentially 2,500 ways in to their IT system. So as good as Jaguar Land Rover's IT system may be internally, where that control starts to sort of loosen or goes beyond the scope of what JLR can do directly is when you get into that SME level supplier. So essentially what's happening here is it is where you have a team of maybe 50 to 100 people, and those people all have a login to their computer, and then maybe someone leaves one of those companies and that login isn't deleted. It's sort of left lingering on the server. And then a clever hacker works out that actually there is this email address that is, no one's really paying attention to this because that person's left the company.
Yep.
So what they do is they gain access to that account because it's fairly easy to guess, or their password is available, let's say on maybe the dark web, and then they get into that company, they gain access to the local system and realize that actually that user still had admin access to the connection that went straight in to the back door to a company that has recently been hacked. I'm sure you can all join the dots between what I'm saying there. So basically, even if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't have much on my hard drive that could be of any use, it might not be your system they're after at all. Now, for example, JLR, for one reason or another, didn't have any cyber insurance, which means they're on the hook for about 3 billion quid. Now, the problem with that is that they don't have 3 billion quid in order to pay out. So you can guess where they're going to be going next. They'll have a legal team who are saddling up right now to ride down to whatever that SME was to talk to them about how good their cyber insurance is, because you can be absolutely sure they are going to start recovering some of this money from the people who let it happen. So that's the kind of big, scary, oh my God, we work for this big supplier. I'm not entirely sure whether we've got cyber insurance. I don't know if we're using a password manager. Definitely is time to start having a think about all this stuff. But you might also be sitting there thinking, well, hang on, Simon, this all sounds big and scary, but we don't have a connection straight into the back door of our biggest supplier. We just make a product for them. We just deliver a service for them. They're just a client in our accounting software. What could a hacker possibly want from us? So, Paul, What could a hacker possibly want from an SME if they don't have that direct access in through like a software means?
Yeah, that is the most common explanation we get from people. No, we're not directly connected to them. What's the problem? Well, you're exchanging information with them. They are sending you some drawings. You're sending them a spreadsheet. So just sending a simple email could actually cause an infection.
Just thinking about that data, because what you described there is sort of using a sort of social engineering hack. So saying, person from SME company is emailing the company, the bigger company, and inadvertently putting some malware into it. So that would be a really good way of getting in and kind of infecting that bigger company through a trusted contact.
Yeah.
The other thing that can happen is that actually the data that is within your business, so that could be drawings, it could be software that you're loading onto a product that you're delivering, it could be the blueprints to a building that you're making or part of the construction of. All of that data might seem quite innocuous on its own. But remember, if these hackers are going after maybe 50 to 100 of these thousands of suppliers, they can start to build up a really in-depth picture of the product or service that that end company is providing. So, for example, you could have details on the security systems, where the, the entry systems are, where the gates are going to be, what spec those gates are, who's making the gate entry system. If you're trying to plan something or trying to do something nefarious, having all of that knowledge at hand is great. And actually, it's going to be really hard to get that from the end supplier. But if you know, for example, well, this company make the alarm and I can get the zip file, which has the software on it that the alarm's made of, then you can reverse engineer that. And that wouldn't be too hard to do if you're going after an SME that doesn't even need a password manager. Why would you bother trying to hack the end client when actually the people who are guardians of that knowledge, shall we say, who are supposed to be looking after it, aren't really paying attention?
I think that's an excellent point. Is actually not just to link to cyber. There's a temptation to go, oh, well, it's all about cyber, it's all about email and so on. But someone who is making the sandwiches for, the big prime contractor, let's say, you think, oh, where's the cyber risk there? They will be sending an invoice. There will be some other connection. So it's tempting for the SME, particularly the smaller ones in that group, to think, well, it's not really a problem. But any one of those can be compromised, and the hackers really are not daft. They will be tracking all of this sort of thing and say, yes, okay, we may not directly attack the IT. Let's do it by a different route, a more simple route.
So I think there is that to consider. There is this sort of, your business is potentially the weakest link in the chain. Now, there's a couple of things you can do straight off the bat. And what I would recommend is, if you're not sure where you stand, is to speak to whoever's looking after your IT. That's probably the easiest, simplest person to call straight away and say, this is what I'm concerned about. How can you help? And they should be able to quite quickly advise you on what they can do. If it's something that they don't really help with, then there are IT firms out there who can help. But at the very least, I do watch the other video that me and Paul made to kind of get some sort of base level tips on how you can sort of increase that cybersecurity protection for your business without it costing a lot of money or taking up too much time.
I think the other thing I'd say is make a plan. People get confused by the phrase risk assessment. I mean, we make this assessment every day when we cross the road. A risk assessment is very, very straightforward. If nothing else, you take away from this video today, what is my risk? Actually, I am interfacing with a big prime contractor. What is the risk? Just give it 5 minutes and go, okay, how could this happen? And then write a plan. Okay, simple plan that says, okay, what would I do in these circumstances? But actually, there's a report on the BBC today talking about, okay, you've got companies who do really good plans, resilience plans against, whether it's fire or cyber incidents or whatever. And those plans are sitting in a safe 100 miles away. What are you going to do when it all goes horribly wrong? So they're saying, write out your plans. I think realistically, probably print out your plans. But, where is the plan? What are you going to do when it goes horribly wrong? I was always given the top tip of at the subsequent court of inquiry. As you mentioned about that JLR supply chain company, it's sort of when it goes wrong, and you have to assume it will go wrong, what will you say? You've got to stand up and justify. What will you say? And it's much better to say, well, we had a plan and actually, we worked to that plan. Yes, perhaps it could have been a bit better, but at least you've got a plan. That's a marvelous first step.
Yeah, whereas just saying, well, we just sort of thought it wouldn't happen. That's not going to work in your
Yeah,
favour,
I've
is it?
heard that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, I think that, it's the old motto of plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Exactly.
I think is definitely the way to approach it. So I hope this video has got you thinking, and hopefully it has made you think that perhaps you need to step back and have another think about the risk and where you sit in that risk sequence for your supply chain, for your business, for your customers, and then what steps you can take to start to mitigate that. Then do reach out to either me or Paul. If you would like to get in contact with me, then you can find me on LinkedIn, Simon Batchelor, or you can go to the website pallant.studio to learn more about what we do. And Paul, if people would like to get in touch with you, specifically, I think to think about that risk element and start to map out those risks, because that is something that you've got a lot of expertise in. How can they get in touch with you, Paul?
Yeah, they can get me on LinkedIn, Paul Everington, or our website, everwell.associates.
Well, thanks very much, everybody, for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Cheers.